It's time to start rallying around America's young conservatives and explore what it means to be a young Republican in the 21st century. In a world where it seems like everyone under 30 must be a liberal, these are the stories you haven't heard before from the voices of America's young conservatives. So let's find out what it truly means to be raised right. Hello, everybody. It's your girl, Rae'Lee Klein, back again for another episode of the Raised Right podcast. I sound kind of like a frat boy. Maybe I need to tone that down a little bit. But I'm excited for this episode. I love all my episodes, but I'm really looking forward to this one because I have a guest on coming from my roots in Wyoming. For those following national politics, you know that the U.S. Representative seat is open in Wyoming. It's currently held by Liz Cheney, but her term is coming to an end. She can run again. We'll see if she announces that. But because of her handling of the January 6th incident, that seat is now highly contested, more than it's probably ever been since I've been involved in politics. And my guest on today is a candidate that I've been supporting and been endorsing kind of behind the scenes. I've never really talked about it before, especially on this show. And he reached out to me and said, it's great to meet a fellow Wyoming. I love what you're doing down in Arizona, and I'd love to come on and talk about the race in Wyoming. And I was like, yes, absolutely. I mean, I know I haven't met you yet. I haven't, reached out to you, but you are the man that I'm supporting for this position. And so he's coming on, and we're going to talk a little bit about Wyoming politics, election integrity, voting participation, just really kind of get into what Wyoming politics looks like and how it's different, and also how it's similar to what I'm used to here in Arizona politics, because I moved down here before I really got into the political world. So I'm interested to kind of hear what is going on up north in the Wild West. So, Denton, I'm so honored to have you on the show. Like I told our listeners, I'm thankful that you reached out to me, but I wanted to start off with Liz Cheney. Okay, let's talk about Liz. So she's done the Republican Party some big injustices by turning her back on Trump, by not really standing up for the voters in Wyoming that put her in that position. She's there were jokes on Fox News that her and Hillary Clinton should run together for a campaign. It's a hot mess. And this is something, from my home state that is near and dear to my heart, but also something that I think needs to be talked more about nationally as well. This is another state that has a big seat open and ready, hopefully, to be taken. And Denton, you have my full endorsement, full support. I think you're an amazing man.
Well, thank you. What's interesting for the listeners out there, for the people watching this, is that Wyoming only has one representative in U.S. Congress. We've got our two senators like every other state, but we've only got one representative, and that's based on a population that's just a little over 500,000 people. And so that one position is a huge. I mean, for Wyoming, it's almost a senatorial equivalent, because that one representative gives us our vote in the House, and because of that, it's very important for Wyoming voters. And interesting enough, Dick Cheney once held that position. That's when I first met him, when I was in high school. And Dick Cheney was actually our representative, and I went and saw him for a close-up program in D.C., and then I saw him again a year later as I was interviewing for military academies, for the service academies. And in fact, Alan Simpson and Malcolm Wallop were our senators then, and Dick Cheney was the representative, and I chose to go to West Point to the United States Military Academy, but that was my first opportunity with them as elected officials. And so Dick Cheney, of course, went on to be our Secretary of Defense, and then on to be Vice President. And so for little old Wyoming, ranked 50th in population in the United States, that was a pretty big deal. And in fact, most of our elected officials, senators, whether it's Wallop or Simpson, or in this case, we've got Brasso and Lummis, that they are in major committees, and they have leadership positions within the party, both for the Senate, and then Cheney held a lot for the House. But as of 6 January, this past year, with everything that took place, from protesters, breaking into the Capitol building, as well as the protests going on, and where Liz Cheney's taken that now from her being appointed by Representative Pelosi to Speaker Pelosi to the committee to investigate. She has totally turned on her head, really, for Wyoming voters of what they expect. And so, her job as representative, the duty description is represent for the people of Wyoming. And most people that I've found here in the state don't agree with what she's proposing on the committee as far as no voter fraud, the great lie, as she calls it, and also that President Trump was instrumental in organizing and executing the break-in of the Capitol, which most people find ridiculous. So because of that, even though she voted on the Republican ticket for the most part on Trump's policies, over 90%, where she's taken this as of January has totally been to her detriment in the state of Wyoming.
Exactly. Yeah. And I remember meeting the Cheneys from her father Dick and her and Dick's wife, and being a young Wyomingite, that was so big and so cool, and I looked up to them so much. And then come January 6th, it was like she did a 180 from the woman that I had met. And like you said, her job is to represent, and most Wyomingites did not agree with the way that she took that. So um, this race, I think what's important obviously is, finding the right person to take that spot and getting her out of that office, but also having a candidate who we know what we're putting in office as well, because sometimes we can get so dialed in on just getting rid of the old that we put something worse in or don't really do all of our research. And knowing you and your background, I think you're more than qualified to hold that position.
I think she's going to have a challenge being reelected. $7 million buys a lot of advertising, but I think she will have trouble getting the votes. And of course, Wyoming, another thing that's unique is Wyoming's representative is not selected by majority vote, but it's selected by most votes. So many people in the state are worried about what they call splitting the vote during the primary in August, where she may obtain enough votes. If there's 3 or 4 people running for the Republican ticket, that she may actually remain as the incumbent. So that is a major concern of people around the state. And interestingly enough, since I've been running 3 times, they've attempted to put into the Wyoming legislation a change to the primary voting so that it is more of a runoff. And it's not most votes, but it's majority votes that would win. So 50 plus 1 that would actually take it. And most feel that would prevent Liz Cheney from accidentally or by chance winning because of the number of candidates. But 3 times that's failed right now in the Wyoming legislature. It is not passed.
So for those our listeners that are, new to politics or don't really know, can you explain what that looks like in a primary when you have most votes versus the majority and then the general election?
Sure. So, Wyoming is a very Republican state. It's a very red state and mostly voted for Trump last election. And because of that, Trump's endorsement is very important. And most people, most likely, if he runs in 2024, will vote for him. The one thing about the majority versus most votes, so majority vote, would come to basically down to 2 candidates because whoever gets over 50% of the vote would win. So they're really seeking a runoff to have 1 Republican candidate, 1 Democrat candidate at the end of the primaries and to run actually for the national election, general election in November. So the fear is, say there's 4 of us, and there's 25% votes out there, but it's not by percent, it's by number. So if you get 1 vote over the other 3 in most votes, you're going to win. So it's really, everybody's really concerned about how many candidates there are. But I said, that's what's important is, beating Liz Cheney is important for Wyomingites, and I got that. But it's also important who does that. So, let's pick the best candidate. And interestingly enough, we're approaching May now, and we've not had 1 debate nor 1 statewide poll to see who Wyomingites want. And, based on election history, there's over 200,000 votes out there. And so, who does Wyoming want? President Trump has endorsed Harriet Hageman. She's a Cheyenne lawyer, was our former Wyoming Republican Party representative to the National Republican Committee for the convention, and she's worked on a lot of land and water use rights in Wyoming at the national level, and that's been Trump's endorsement as of August last year. But I said, well, we got a year from that time for a candidate to drive 23 counties, talk to people, and decide who Wyoming wants. Wyoming does get a choice. It's our representative.
Absolutely. And I think that's so important in what you're doing is connecting with people one on one, sharing your message of why you're qualified for this position.
So much of politics is based on money. And everybody's, well, how much money did you raise? Now, that is indicative of support somewhat. But when money starts coming from outside the state, special interest groups going through political action committees, large corporations go through political action committees, and then private donations, the max is 2,900 per individual per election. When those come from outside the state, you got to wonder, well, how much does money matter? I always say money buys advertisements, but it doesn't buy votes. Relationships buy votes. Name recognition is important. Most voters, unfortunately, in the United States, will look at a ballot on election day for the first time and see names that they never researched or know who they are. There may be some name familiarity with some incumbents that have always been there, or like the Cheneys, a pretty popular name in Wyoming based on their political history. And, somebody they may have seen on a billboard or in the newspaper or something, and that's a name they recognize, so they check the block. So what's important is that voters educate themselves and understand who the candidates are, what they stand for, and then also to get out there and vote. And you and I talked earlier a little bit about people not actually going to the voting polls and voting. They haven't registered. And in particular, look at a lot of our 18-year-olds that just became eligible to vote, our high school seniors, college freshmen, that have no idea how to go about the process, and then how important it is that they get out and make their mark.
Yeah, I think that's so. I think, in Wyoming, I think they don't want to go out and vote because everybody's so set in their ways. You think, oh, Republicans are going to win or so and so is going to win because they have the name recognition or whatever. And so everybody just gets comfortable and they don't go vote. But for younger kids on the education side, I mean, I remember in high school, you don't learn about that. You don't get taught how to go register to vote. You're not taught any of that. And so I think it's so important that we get into schools and start talking to younger people, especially about political involvement, because we need it.
Yeah, I mean, I would go through the drive-through at Taco John's here in Gillette, and I talked to the young man handing me my food, and I said, "Are you going to vote this year?" And he goes, "I don't know." I said, "Well, are you 18?" He said, "Yes, I am." I said, "Well, you got to vote." And he goes, "Yeah. How do you do it?" I said I had a quick talk while I was in line there about going to the county clerk and registering and going through that process to vote. And it just surprised me really. Like you talked about in high school, there's government classes that are mandatory. And are we talking to everybody about getting out there and ensuring that they vote? And a lot of people, like you said, think their vote doesn't count. I'm not going to matter my one vote, or I don't like any of them, so I'm not going to vote at all. And we need to realize that we need to take control of our leaders who we've sent to Washington, D.C. and to Cheyenne or wherever else to represent us. And if we don't take active part in that, what business do we have complaining about it?
Exactly. That's so true. It's like if you didn't partake, you have no room to talk about it down the road. And it's such a privilege in this country to be able to go and vote for who gets to represent you that we don't appreciate that anymore.
It is. It's ironic. I spent 30 years in the military. When I left Campbell County in Gillette, Wyoming, and back in 1983, I went to West Point for 4 years and then served in the Army for 30. And part of that time was in Iraq. The first time in 2003 during the invasion, but the second time was major elections for their brand new formed government. And it's ironic that we were there providing outside security while the Iraqi army and police were providing inner security at the polling sites. And we were ensuring that there were armed transports to make sure the ballots got from point A to point B. and that people are only voting once, and they dip their finger in the purple ink to show. And I'm thinking, I look back at that and how successful that was, that process, and then to the fiasco this last election, where we have mail-in ballots that went to anybody. There was no control, accountability, or transparency on who is voting, how many times they're voting, who is counting it. And, we're all about individual rights and state rights. Well, states have the right to elect and run their elections. And the federal government now is trying to take some of those rights away from states and make mandatory voting laws at the federal level. But, that's states' business. Unfortunately, some of the states did not follow their voting laws. They violated them flat out, whether it was, by days or turn-in times or how the process was to be conducted, oversight, and it wasn't enforced. And as a result, people ask, well, do you think there was fraud last election? I said fraud every election. Just this time was so compounded by the way the mail-in ballots were sent out. And you can blame COVID or whatever you want. It's not a good excuse. I mean, you could go to Costco, but you couldn't go to church and you couldn't go vote, So that was ridiculous. And as a result, a lot of Americans don't know what happened last election just because there was no transparent accountability. And so this whole business of January 6th, whether it's fraud in election, our problem as Americans right now is we got to fix our voting system. And that needs to be done by states, not the federal government.
Absolutely. It's a big, big mess to clean up.
Voter ID, same thing. You got to show your driver's license to go into a bar or, to get your license plates or, whatever. You don't have to show it to vote, which influences who represents us in the national and state governments. That's crazy, that we can't say, here's who I am. I'm a U.S. citizen, and here's my one vote.
Right, exactly. It's such a mess that we've created. It's going to take strong leadership on both the state and federal level to clean that up. And we could talk about that forever with this interview because I know we don't have all the time in the world. I want to pivot more to talking about you. And I mean, you were raised in Wyoming, have an incredible military career, work in DC. What woke you up to wanting to run for a federal seat?
Well, always growing up, I was about service. And that's why, as a high schooler, I decided I wanted to serve in the military and did that for 30 years. And I'd probably still be serving if Congress didn't have that U.S. code that says you have to get out after 30 years as a colonel. So I would still be serving. But as I retired and came out, I continued to help veterans. And then this past year, I really got fed up like most Americans did. Really mad about what's happened to our federal government. Day one, the Biden administration completely reversed policies that were working and effective, whether it be the border, our economy, inflation, the debt, our respect on foreign relations by world leaders around the globe and then at home. We weren't fighting about race. We were working towards American success and American leadership, not only across the world but in the United States strongly. And states were getting their rights recognized and upheld, and we were all about individual rights. That went away day one. The borders opened wide, got people coming through. We don't know who they are. I just saw that Texas just sent a busload back to D.C., so that's a good thing. But yeah, everything from national security, controlling our own borders, and having served 30 years, that's what I was doing, is protecting the United States. And then I see our government just open the borders wide up. The economy, pitting race against race, some of the education that's going on in our schools right now that are promoting really racial discord. And we were working towards complete, since the civil rights movement back in the 60s, toward that not being an issue in the United States. It was important and we were going the right way, but now we've thrown it back in everybody's faces. So there's a lot of different things that are taking place, in particular for Wyoming, that you and I grew up in. My great granddad homesteaded out here, so ranching was very important. Cattle, sheep, agriculture, very important here. And then our energy. We're the energy capital of the nation. Coal, oil, natural gas, other precious minerals, our livelihood here. And those revenue helped fund our school systems, which you and I grew up in great school systems, wonderful teachers that we could pull from across the nation to come here, and sports, activities, everything that you would want for your child or children was right here in Wyoming, to include the minus 20-degree weather, during the winter. But it's a place where those revenue were put towards the right things, and that has gone away with the moratorium on production and distribution of fossil fuels. The United States with the shutdown, just to say here, deal with wind and solar, which are underdeveloped. We ought to be looking at them as alternatives, but they're underdeveloped. And you can't just cut off the main supply of energy for the United States and then rely on foreign imports of coal and natural gas. And, we were energy self-sufficient, energy independent. And that went away upon the Biden administration taking control. So that's probably one of the most important things for Wyomingites. Why I got so upset when I saw my hometown and my home state drastically affected by presidential policies. And a lot of those were policies and not necessarily U.S. code laws that were passed through Congress. And we've seen that trend of, the executive branch making policy that ought to be codified in law after it passes through both the House and the Senate. And that's a problem right now that we need to fix in the United States. The three branches of government are supposed to be co-equal checks and balances. And politicizing the courts, limiting the power of Congress because the executive makes rules and Congress follows. We really need to replace the Speaker of the House to ensure that we can pass laws that stay within a budget and don't put debt upon our kids and our grandkids. That's all important. So, answer your question, yeah, I got mad. And I thought, I've got the capability, the skills, and the expertise right now to do something. And why U.S. Congress? A lot of people said, you were in the Army for 30 years. How come you didn't start at the city or county or state level? And I said, there's no time. Give me 2 years in Congress, and I will, as a rookie congressman, I will be raising hell on the floors of those committees. I'll seek leadership positions and do the right vote inside the chambers to support Wyomingites on their values, their wishes, their desires on what they want done. And, a lot of people say, well, Liz Cheney did that for us, but then she had to make a hard decision based on her values and what she believed to be right for the Constitution and everything. And she did that, and we respect her for that. And I said, well, yeah, you respect people that stand up for what they believe in, but if what they believe in doesn't correspond with their elected constituents back there, that voted them in the office, then that's a problem. And to do that at the start of your term and then just stay in office, our one representative, the only one we got, that does not believe what Wyomingites believe, that's a problem.
Right. And we see that all over the country is people forget that this is a service role and you have to reflect the values of the people who put you in office. It's not a self-serving position at all. I mean, and that's one of going off of that, why I support you and respect you so much as a candidate is because you're an American first and one of those Americans that just said, that's enough. It's time for we the people to step in and take our country back and get rid of these people who have been lifelong politicians in and out of the system their whole life and are in the swamp, so to speak. And there's people on both sides, I truly believe, that are in that Kahoot, and people like you and Carrie Lake who are just Americans that are moms, dads, human beings that just said, that's enough. We're taking our country back. That's what we need.
Yeah, I've never been a politician, and I don't really want to be. What I want to do is serve. I want to ensure change is made for the benefit of the United States and for Wyoming. And that's why I want to serve. Um, I don't have a lot of money. They say you don't get rich in the Army. That's true. It's about service. And so, Liz has raised over $7 million. Harriet Hageman is President Trump's endorsement here in Wyoming, and she's got over $1 million in a very short time. And I think I've raised just under $25,000. And I said I'm driving to 23 counties asking for $1.50. But true money buys capability to advertise and market yourself, but it doesn't buy votes. and votes are created by relationships. And so to go around and talk to people and let them gain an understanding of who you are and what you're about, they respect that, especially in Wyoming. And they respect that it's our election. You know, I joke that it's not an appointment or an anointment, it's an election, and it's Wyoming's election. And therefore, if you're a candidate and want to run, you ought to be able to. And you ought to be able to go to full term to the election to let the Wyoming people decide who they want. So yeah, it's a balance between, well, what are you going to do? You're going to split the vote, and Liz is going to win. Well, you know, we've got a while before August comes around. August 16th is our primary, and at that time, I've always said we're going to have to do the right thing for Wyoming. You know, right now there's 5 Republican candidates, and you know, preferably we'd like to have one person running against Liz Cheney, but that's not necessarily what has to happen. You know, it's whoever gets the most votes.
Right. It's so interesting. And Wyoming, although very red, is not free of political drama. We talked about this a little bit previously about how the parties kind of split. Can you talk more about that?
It is, you know, what I've seen in my short time here campaigning this year is Wyoming has its pioneers and ranchers and coal miners and everybody that have been here for a really long time. But it's also got a large influx of people that are moving here. So much like the exodus from California, Washington, Oregon, people are flowing into Idaho, Utah, Nevada, Montana, Wyoming. And a lot of it's for tax advantages. A lot of it's for the right reasons, freedom. And so when you have governors and other representatives that are very restrictive on your individual state rights, people got tired of it. And so you've got a lot of new people coming in. And the fear is, you know, don't California my Wyoming, or you know that saying. And I'm telling people, hey, a lot of people that are moving in here are moving for the right reasons and have the same beliefs you do about freedom. Now there is a Democratic pocket in Wyoming, a lot of it around Jackson, up in the northwest area, and you know parts across the state. But there's a Democratic party in Wyoming, um, but rarely do you see that Democratic Party actually winning an election at the Senate or congressional level. Um, you know, we've gone back and forth on the governorship for gubernatorial races, but really it's always been Republican for the congressmen and senators for the most part. So where does that fall in? Well, here's another fear that people have because of Wyoming having an open primary. You can switch parties. So for the August primary, um, the fear is some of the Democrats will register as Republicans, vote for Liz Cheney, one because of their dislike of Trump, um, but also to screw up what the Republicans want. And then once that primary is over, then to revert back to being a Democrat and vote in the general election in November for their Democratic candidate. So there's a lot of game playing. There's a lot of speculation, I guess, on what could happen. But Wyoming spoke 3 times in the legislature. They shot down the bill to change from the most votes and no runoff to what is currently in place and still in place is most votes win. And you can cross over vote during the primary. And that probably gets to Wyomingites' belief in individual freedom. I'll vote for who I want to vote for. I don't have to vote party line. And a lot of people believe that. So it's interesting. There's also the fear of the political elite, like you talked about, people that have been around forever and they live for politics, and that's their passion, their hobby, and their lifeline. And they stay around and they get involved and they make a lot of the decisions. So you talk about a political elite, whether that be the Republican or Democratic state party or at the national level, that you've got a lot of the same people in the same venues making the same decisions, and nobody else new needs to come in. And so a lot of new folks that are new to elections and the running process as elected official have some roadblocks to face and some hurdles to get through.
Exactly. Yeah, it takes a wave of courageous people who, like you and I, have said enough's enough and are willing to sacrifice and give up all of it because we love our country. And I think everybody needs to start feeling that way and thinking that way. Well, thank you, Denton, so much for coming on to share not only just about the Wyoming race, but about yourself and why it is highly contested and highly important for the future of not only Wyoming, but the entire country. So you have our support here. We're happy to endorse and help in any way that we can, I can, and we wish you all the best. If you're a conservative ready to stand firm in their beliefs and fight for freedom, you're not going to want to miss a single episode of the Raised Right podcast. You can subscribe on any of your favorite podcast apps so you're up to date on what's going on in the political world. Be sure to like, follow, and share our content on an Instagram page at Raised Right Podcast and Facebook and Twitter at Raised Right Pod. This is what it means to be raised right.